Do you have a notification that says Youri's recording the call?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Alrighty. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And we are rejoined by my good friend Boyan Stanislavski, who is the editor-in-chief and co-founder of the Barricade. The Barricade, which is an independent pan-Eastern European left-leaning news outlet, which covers Jesus, sorry about this. Okay, the Barricade, which is a pan-Eastern European news outlet which covers Eastern European affairs and international affairs, always from a critical left perspective, as well as cultural affairs. And yes, so this is our all things Eastern European episode, all things former communist, post-communist states, or even current communist states. And we're going to be specifically talking about Bulgaria, which is Boyan's home country. So first off, Boyan, thank you so much for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Always an honor to have you. And I know that we're strict for time, so let's get underway. So, Boyan, explain.
Yeah, and I apologize for that. It's been like that during the previous recording and now. But I'm happy to be a frequent guest on your show, although not for a long time, not for longer than 45, 50 minutes.
No worries, no worries. So, Boyan, so then briefly explain from the top again what's been going on in Bulgaria. I'll try to summarize at least my understanding that there's been once more large popular protests against the Western-backed regressive capitalist order in Bulgaria following the counter-color revolutions that unseated the communist rulers for a long time. And for a long time, there's been a dodgy, crooked individual called Boyko Borisov, who's been backed by Germany and the U.S. Reports of his mafia governance and the skeletons in his closet has come to light, and there's been election after election. His opposition, which is not a left alternative, has unseated him, but later they made a coalition with him, and throughout all of this, in recent news, the Barricade has been monitoring and reporting this, as well as the U.S. Embassy, which has been shaping, co-opting, and doing a lot of divide and conquer in Bulgaria and Germany as well. Am I right about that? Do explain.
Yes, well, we could almost end the program on everything you said, on everything you just said, because well, that's pretty much the summation that I could give about what's been going on in Bulgaria. So that's true. Over the last 2 years, we've had 5 rounds of parliamentary elections, and many people have referred to it as a kind of crisis. Some would even call it like permanent or semi-permanent political crisis, as if modern Bulgaria, since the inception of this entity about 140 years ago, has ever been in a situation which is not critical. I mean, the Bulgarians, especially if we're talking about current modern Bulgarians, we've always lived in crisis, right before crisis, preparing for it, or trying to recover from a crisis that had just occurred. So, for us, this is.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is why you once said that this is why Bulgarians, and particularly Eastern Europeans in general, they do favor stability. If there's anything that Eastern Europeans dislike, it's constant instability and crises. So Bulgarians and Eastern Europeans, they do like stability, even if it may be negative stability. Am I right?
Well, of course, that depends. What is negative and what is positive? What is positive is a very relative kind of concept. So, whatever can be positive and interesting for a person, living in Bulgaria, Russia, or Belarus, or Poland, does not have to necessarily have the same kind of values, carry the same kind of values for a person living in the United States, Canada, Australia, or I don't know, South Africa, for that matter. So I would say, in general, the notion of stability is the central notion to most Eastern European nations, probably all Eastern European nations. I mean, when it comes to political choices that are going to be made, they sometimes are made on the kind of basis of divisive topics that are that are exacerbated by the media. They are sometimes made on the basis of some economic experiences, but relatively fresh ones. I mean, the economic memory is shorter than even the news memory, which basically teaches people that history starts 15 minutes ago. So that happens, but mostly when the choice is between nothing and nothing, which is the most frequent choice that we have been served after 1989 throughout the whole region of Eastern Europe, to some exception, to some extent, except for Russia and Belarus, but that's an entirely different talk, entirely different model, entirely different story. Nonetheless, the question of stability has always been central. I mean, between nothing and nothing, you choose the more stable nothing. Between poverty and poverty, you choose the more stable poverty. Between austerity and austerity, you choose the more stable austerity. And between cliques of people that you don't trust, between cliques of people that you find hostile, between cliques of people that you are very angry with, you will still vote for the clique that is going to bring about some kind of, and in this sense, it's truly negative, but still stability. So yeah, that's, I think, a very important factor that many journalists from Western Europe who are trying to describe the situation in Eastern Europe, they always look, or almost always look to look at this region through Western spectacles. And I think this is the major mistake, the most important misleading factor. And we can see it, by the way, not only when it comes to Bulgaria, but more prominently when it comes to countries like Russia, for example. Russia, until today, Bulgaria is a similar case in terms of various misunderstandings that have built up in a cascading manner in the West with regards to this or that country in Eastern Europe. But Russia, I think, is a very, very prominent, a very good example, because we can see today, after 1 year, more than 1 year, like almost 18 months, I suppose, of this, what the Russians refer to as special military operation, which is war, essentially, you can see that they keep scratching their heads and they don't understand what's going on. They don't understand how come Russia's economy is unresponsive, as they say, to sanctions. They don't understand how is it possible that despite the hardships that the Russian society has to endure, regardless of the sanctions and all the rest of the circus, but many hardships which are now a result not so much of the alleged isolation of Russia, but because of the remodeling of the Russian economy and Russian society during times of war, which is the case, which are the circumstances. Despite that, the support for the central federal government in Moscow has grown to an unprecedented level of about 86 to 87% recently, including pollsters that are friendly to the West, or at least disloyal to put. The West is not able to wrap its head around that. And of course, similarly, the West is not able to understand how could it be that in a country like Bulgaria, 5, 6, 10, or 20 rounds of parliamentary elections do not solve anything, and no one cares about the number, because apparently the Bulgarians, they might not be very they won't be very enthused to vote because the turnout is very low. We're talking about 30% maybe of the population eligible to vote voting. But they're even less so mathematicians. Like, they don't count how many times they have to go to vote and this kind of things. Like, all those factors which are central to the analysis, in inverted commas, made by Western journalists about Bulgaria, about Poland, about many other countries in Eastern Europe, maybe all of them even, those factors that are central, they mean very little when it comes to the actual situation. No one in Bulgaria cares whether we have 5, 10, or 9, or whatever amount of parliamentary elections. Why? Because no one cares about parliamentary elections. 30%, again, of people eligible to vote. And now Western journalists, of course, they start their usual rituals of cry over, oh my God, you know, the Bulgarian society is so hopeless. You know, they are uninterested in politics and they are not able to develop the civil society that we need in order for the sovereign to participate in the most central processes shaping up the future of their country, blah, 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 blah. You know, I mean, this is something that you are taught on Western universities, on some, you know, Eastern European universities too, by the way, which is a pity, because it teaches you exactly nothing about the world and nothing about the systems. Nonetheless, you know, in Bulgaria, people don't vote, and I think it's a correct attitude. I salute the Bulgarian nation and the Bulgarian voters for non-voting, because you need a reason to vote.
Yeah.
And this is very important. And, you know, you can have all kinds of virtues that are very important for the Westerns, for the Westerners, like, you know, oh, democracy. And, you know, if you don't participate in democracy, then, you know, the world's going to go to, you know, the world's going to end, right? Or something like that. Well, no, it's not so important for us. In general, the notion of democracy is nothing sacred. Democracy has been around for about, like, formally speaking, at least for about 30 years. No one associates anything that has, well, with the exception of a small group of people, okay, in Bulgaria, who have truly benefited from the restoration of capitalism. But most of the population, most of the voters, most of the public, they associate the last 30 years with democracy and with all kinds of criminal and degrading developments that have struck Bulgaria, struck the Bulgarian nation, and basically, you know, we were economically bumped back to the very primitive stage that we've had to overcome during the times of Tsarism and during the times of the People's Republic. Of course, the second attempt was much more effective, but nonetheless, we were now knocked back by the West to a stage which I would say that is unprecedented, not only over the last 140, 150 years since the existence, since the beginning of the modern Bulgarian state, but it doesn't have any precedent in the 1300 years of, more than that even, almost 1400 years of recorded Bulgarian history as a state and as a nation. So we're talking about Bulgaria being absolutely dysfunctional, failed state where nothing public works, where no institution is doing its job unless someone who has some sort of autocratic charisma or power goes there and threatens repression, then certain things do happen, where all institutions that are supposed to regulate the new ethics, morality, and law, that is the judicial system, the prosecutors, well, all kinds of institutions related to legal order that is supposed to be defended and regulated in Bulgaria, including, of course, the parliament, that is the legislature. We're talking about a situation where those institutions are only governed exclusively and only by interests of some corporate, bureaucratic, and mafia cliques that function in the country, because of those cliques being there and actually commanding everything, they have prevented Bulgaria from having a real economy, let alone if it's a capitalist economy or whatever kind of economy you wanna name it. I mean, there are leftists, and I've been in a very critical dialogue with this particular segment of the left political, well, you know, the left political arena, let's say, in our region, who say that, oh, it's because capitalism, you know, can always result in mafia-style kind of governments and that kind of arguments I've heard from that. But that's of course true, but you know, it's not such an easy thing. I mean, you cannot just go around, hang around, and dismiss everything with capitalism. That's, of course, a central problem in terms of the architecture of the current state of affairs. But let us not forget that, you know, capitalism also does have certain characteristics and certain features which the Bulgarian economy currently does not really display. You know, if you take the people who are the major figures in the Bulgarian economy, then you will easily see that their whole wealth has been accumulated over the past decades through stealing, through looting what the state had produced between 1944 and 1989. Had anyone put those people in any kind of market competition conditions, they wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes. So we're not talking about any kind of capitalism. We're talking about a system which does have a capitalist architecture, because there is free market, there is, all kinds of things, right, which are very typical for the capitalist system and the capitalist economy. But we don't really have the dynamics of capitalist economy that can grow or gain some kind of traction through those mechanisms, right? You'd expect someone to try and make more profits, and that of course happens, but it doesn't happen within the framework of what capitalism has designed for itself to gain flexibility and to grow. So we're talking about a largely failed state and a largely failed economy, and most of all, which is the saddest part of the whole thing, is we're talking about largely failed nation. We're talking about a nation which has decreased in terms of quantity from over 9 million in 1990 to a little over 6 million, officially speaking, a little over 6 million in the when was it? I think 2 years ago. Yeah, I think 2 years ago was this kind of, I forgot the word in English when you count there's a name for this procedure, the counting of whatever of people that live on the territory of your country, right? So we're talking about one-third.
Census?
Yes, thank you. Census. Yes, exactly. That's it. So it's we're talking about a nation that's been devastated in terms of quantity without a war. There was no, not a single fire has been shot. We're talking about a nation that's been degraded economically to the extent that very little people have even room in their everyday life to think about anything else than kind of making the two ends meet. We're talking about a system that has sacked tens of thousands, maybe not tens of thousands, but thousands for sure, or a dozen at least of thousands of teachers and professors, and has turned them into taxi drivers and then kicked them away, and who are now working in the Europe, somewhere in Western Europe. We're talking about a nation that has been devoid, an economy that's been devoid, that's been stripped of everything that decides about the quality of one, that is, economy or nation. We have no more science or high tech. We have no more heavy industry. We have very little left of military industry, which has been, part of it largely privatized, so in hands of various oligarchs. We have, the list is long. I don't want to go, and spend too much time on it. But we're talking about a nation that's been on the verge during the 80s, beginning of the 80s, end of the 70s. That was the golden moment, one could say, of people's republics all across the region, but Bulgaria probably most notably. That was a moment when it was visible, and it was actually, analyzed by many sociologists, not only in Bulgaria, not only in the Soviet Union, but in Europe in general, including Western Europe, that Bulgarians started to resemble modern society with, specific groups of interest, specific groups of economic development, specific groups specialized in different areas, and that was a moment where we thought everybody was very happy and everybody was thinking we've actually completed a great task that's been ahead of us, right? And we are now going to be able to provide the fruits of that development to our children, to our grandchildren, and so on and so forth. And 9 years later, everything was gone. So we're also talking about a nation that's been so profoundly let down, a nation that feels so betrayed by history, by elites, by the preceding generations. We're talking about a major demoralization. And I'm not talking that people don't have morals, like, in general, but we're talking about lack of basic hope for anything. Okay, we're talking about lack of people thinking about what is the purpose of their existence. Like, once we used to ask the question, I've heard, many people asking the question, like, what are you going to leave to your children? What am I going to leave to my children? How the country is going to look like, how my house is going to look like, how many, this or that we're going to have, how big is the field going to be? I mean, we're talking about the Bulgaria being a very agrarian nation, and the Bulgarian agro industry, so to say, used to be one of the strongest in the world. In the world, we used to compete with the United States in terms of tobacco exports. Our paprikas and apricots and all kinds of fruits and vegetables, they were all that was exported to to the Soviet Union, to Western Europe, everywhere. We've always been in the top 10 of exporters of various foods and produce and so on and so forth. Now we import everything. So like try to think of someone who's been through this kind of like period of 30, 40 years of devastatingly contradictory experiences. Okay. And try to use this context like in a serious manner and try to tell this person, oh, things are very critical. You've been voting for 5 times over the last 2 years. That's horrible. Like, I mean, you really need to sort of try and get a little bit of a background before you come up with the kind of cliches.
Very quickly, though, before I get to this, second official question of mine, a quick follow-up, very briefly. Do you what's the U.S. embassy in Germany banking? Are they hoping for just another Boyko Borisov, or would they actually like him to be ousted, and whoever comes across, the fake left or whatever liberal, comes across as the great as the great white knight, are they hoping that person comes along to replace him because they really want Bulgaria to be fully aligned with NATO and the pivot to Asia?
It's difficult for me to say whether they want someone like Boyko Borisov. I think they want someone much more obedient than him, because Boyko Borisov, as much as I dislike him, he does have certain features which make him attractive to many Bulgarians. He's very straightforward. He is very primitive in certain aspects, which make him look as if he's one of us. He's also understanding very well the kind of how to superficially flirt with the people, how to attract them, like, for the moment, just to make them stay with you for like the next 5 months until the elections are done, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah,
so he
kind of like the late Silvio, kind of like the late Silvio Berlusconi in a way, I would imagine.
Yes, I think so. Although I think Silvio Berlusconi was probably much less criminal than him, but in the very sense of the word. But that's a completely different conversation and a kind of comparison that I don't feel I have enough expertise to make. Nonetheless, I'm not sure what it is.
Because we're trying to analyze Bulgaria through Bulgarian lens, not always with the Western lens.
And I'm
also guilty of doing that sometimes.
Oh, so, okay. I mean, when I said it, I didn't mean you. I mostly meant like people that write for The Guardian or the Washington Post and stuff like that. I think you're much more competent than them. But I want to say that it's. I think they want someone much more obedient, someone who is not going to try and take into consideration something that, of course, has to be taken into consideration, but the desperation, the hubris of American imperialism has gone so far that they decided to disregard some of the factors which are essential for their reign. And one such factor is the appeasement of the societies that they rule over. And this is something they don't want to consider anymore. Now they just want to use the hammer. And, when you're the hammer, then what was the saying? Like, every problem seems like a nail, right? So they want to use this hammer, and they want to make sure that they have people in power who are going to receive orders without any discussion, who are going to just report to the embassy without any discussion, who are going to do everything. And if there's something undoable or impossible, they will figure it out without asking the embassy. And they want someone who will disregard completely, but absolutely completely, what the Bulgarian public thinks. So that's who they want. Do they have someone like that? Yes. The problem is, which is the party that we spoke about last time. That is the party called the coalition of parties called We Continue the Change and what was it, Democratic Bulgaria, you know. So we continue to change in democratic Bulgaria now together with Boyko Borisov, whom they have to be in cahoots with because otherwise they wouldn't be able to rule because of the numbers in the parliament, right? So that's impossible.
Because he still gets a huge level of support, but because of the ideology of coalition governments, they have to rule. They simply have to rule with him because he does have the numbers there that says that he has to govern, but in coalition with, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Look, we could dig a little deeper here, and I can try and explain this nuance maybe a little more in a little more precise kind of manner. Okay. Now, the situation is the following: the parties. The coalition We Continue the Change / Democratic Bulgaria is allegedly a party, a movement that's grown out of the huge protests that were organized almost every day, sometimes every second day, over the year or 14 months preceding the first of the 5 rounds of the parliamentary elections that had taken place over the last 2 years. So it's a little complicated in terms of chronology, but try to bear with me and then you'll understand the nonsense of it all. So this party allegedly has grown out of those protests. That's not very accurate. That's not exactly true. Some parts of it did participate in those protests and were recognized as legitimate elements within those protests, but they were grown out of them. They imposed themselves as the kind of opposition to Boyko Borisov on those protests partially. But anyway, they were recognized as a legitimate part of those protests. And then because of the impotence of the Bulgarian political system and the voting and the electorate being disappointed and so on and so forth, we had a few so-called technical governments. Technical government means a government appointed by the president because you got to have a government, right? So when there is no parliamentary majority that can actually come up with a government that can be voted on and can gain and can become a legal, normal, so to say, government, then you have technical government. And 1 technical government, 2 technical, 3, 4, I don't know how many. I've lost the count how many technical governments we've had. But during the first 2 technical governments, those 2 people who today lead the country, lead the party called We Continue to Change. Sorry, the name is so ridiculous. I keep forgetting, how to properly explain it in English. So it's those 2 people have become ministers and have increased their importance, like in a very systematic and steady manner. And in the beginning, they've done some very clever and very courageous, I would even say, moves, like, going, like sending, the economic police here and there, where it's been known that Boyko Borisov's friends are, organizing large-scale thefts or laundering money or that kind of stuff, right? So they did make some moves, which were very important and have gained them some confidence from the public, from the Bulgarian public. And then subsequently they created a party that is called We Continue the Change, which is referring to these changes that they back then started, right? Like we are going to continue the change. Then there was a period of very convoluted sort of fights and struggles within the Bulgarian establishment. I don't have the time to go into it right now, but what basically happened is that We Continue to Change had to unite itself with a party called Democratic Bulgaria, which is a split from GERB, from this party of Boyko Borisov. But long ago, when this guy leading this party used to be his justice minister and resigned in protest because he apparently only then, when he became the justice minister, he saw what kind of criminal gang this GERB and Boyko Borisov is, right? So they united. They united in a coalition now. And in order to be able to rule, they, of course, have figured out already quite some time ago that they have to go to the American embassy and ask for a blessing. And they did go there, but the problem was that the American embassy was increasing the pressure on them to make Bulgaria part, a legitimate part of the West, to make it the kind of newcomer to the West, like Poland is, like, Czech Republic is, like Slovakia, that this way, right? And that is an impossible task. That will never happen. I mean, maybe in some, if some exceptional situation occurs, then maybe yes, but it will not happen. Why? Because the Bulgarian nation is not the same as the Polish nation or as the Czech nation or as the Austrian or German nation. The Bulgarian nation finds its places its cultural, civilizational, if you like, loyalty, not with Berlin, not with Paris, not with London or Washington, but with the East, most notably with Moscow. And this has, of course, there are many layers I could explain here, but most important is the historical layer. All Bulgarians know that modern Bulgaria is, in fact, a byproduct of Russian history. Had it not been for Russia, had it not been for the Russian-Turkish War at the end of the 19th century, there would have been no Bulgaria whatsoever, and we would be, the Bulgarians, like the Kurds in Turkey today. So, this is just this one fact should give you a kind of very simple understanding of where is.
But what I was trying to get at is that with all of these elections that have been happening, Boyko Borisov is still voted in by a large segments of the by large segments of the people. Hence why these opposition parties have to work with him. They can't just they can't just dismiss him. I mean, they could. With the U.S. embassy's blessing, and then, but they have to keep a little bit of that appearance of democracy going on.
Yeah, and also Boyko Borisov is trying to give them the idea that, look, I'm the only guy that can actually push the American imperialist procedure in Bulgaria. And he's probably right, because he at least has a pinch of brain in his head. And he goes like, okay, look, I can do this for you, despite the fact that you started disliking me. I'm talking about Borisov imaginary talk to the Americans. I know that you dislike me. I know that you're tired with my criminal, activity and stuff like that. But if you really want Bulgaria to be on the side of America, you can only do that with me. And by the way, even if you don't like me, there are still people voting for me. And we can go again into another nuance why people are massively voting for Boyko Borisov. But what I'm trying to say here is that he is trying to position himself again as the only alternative for the United States. And the party, what is it called again? There is such what was it? We continue the change. Yeah. We continue the change in democratic Bulgaria. They are very, very obedient, and they go to the embassy and they listen to the embassy. The problem is that they actually need Boyko Borisov in order to be able to somehow, keep the Bulgarian society subordinate, because they're not able to do that. And they know this. And the problem is only that this coalition that has occurred now is going to kill both of those parties. So it's their last song on stage, because those two parties are supposed to hate each other, and the electorates of those two parties hate each other. And now when they see them, in one bed, they will never ever vote for them, with the exception of some fanatics maybe, but no one will vote for them. So it's the last song on stage for them. What is going to be that last song? Well, can you try and make a guess what the American embassy is going to demand from them before everything utterly collapses?
So in other words, the electorate that vote for "We Continue to Change" in democratic Bulgaria would actually prefer that they stay in opposition, not get into government and prop up Boyko Borisov, who, for legitimate reasons, they've had enough with.
Yes.
Interesting. And we don't have that much time, so I need to ask this question about the European Union. But before we get into that, talk to us about the very wide, popular anti-NATO protest, which I'm stunned doesn't get coverage even from the best Western anti-imperialist news websites. And before you answer that. And before you answer that, this is very important, because as you have explained many times before, Bulgarians, you cannot make Bulgarians Russophobic. That's just not in the history. It's not in the DNA. And even if you eradicate you know, and even if you eradicate Bulgarian, leftism, which is influenced by by what was the Soviet Union. So even if you completely eradicate that, and you prop up a libertarian here, a liberal here, a social democrat here that all wants to be obedient to the West, or all wants to align themselves with with whatever they're influenced by the West. You're still going to get a right-wing Bulgarian that wants peaceful coexistence with Moscow, which is which has its capitalism with Russian characteristics. Now, am I right?
Yeah, you're mostly right. I mean, regardless of what people think about themselves, whether they're liberal, left, or socialist, or whatever, these are just labels, and they don't mean anything in Bulgaria. They've never meant anything much. But these days, when the political compass is completely broken, they mean nothing. This is just kind of self-appointments, with regards to where I find myself best in terms of the political understanding of the large scope that I see. So we're talking about individual kind of perception of oneself. I don't think it's very important. But fact of the matter is that today, like in many countries in Eastern Europe, by the way, again, most notably, I think in Russia, you will see that the main division line when it comes to the general political discourse, not so much even the discussions, but the discourse is like, you have the people who are calling themselves state-oriented or sovereignty-oriented, and then you have those who are positioned by the other discourse as globalists. I think that's the word that they use. So like on the one hand, you have people who are very focused on the state, and then people who are focused more on processes which are global and not so much on the kind of the state entity or the statehood itself. And
in other words, people who care more about aligning themselves with NATO and the
European Union,
the European Union's foreign policy, which is just an extension of NATO, and then these people who call themselves sovereigntists say that like they just want to focus on Bulgarian domestic affairs before they worry about about militarism and stuff like that, but which they even think is not important because they just want peaceful coexistence with Moscow and the rest.
Most people, of course, like no one in Bulgaria wants to go to war. Okay, that's kind of like unlike Poland, for example, where many people at least make the impression that they want to go to war. Then in Bulgaria, it's not like that. But I want to say that the question of this focus on the state is very important, not because I think it's important in terms of political philosophy, but it's important because the state that still exists, regardless of what it, of the state, right? Which means regardless of all the pathologies, but it's still there. And it's the only thing that people who really care for something to actually be there can refer to. I mean, it's the only reference point that they have. They still have the state, okay? They don't have money. They don't have proper housing. They don't have healthcare. They don't have proper economy. They don't have, real serious wages. No, they really have nothing. They only have the state. So they are trying to cling to that in order to create a kind of, a reference point, I guess, for developing anything, And in Russia, it resulted in basically a translation of, it resulted in people widely accepting that the fate of the Russian state is basically identical with the fate of the Russian people, which we know does not necessarily have to be very kind of proportional, but
But in Bulgaria, there has been wide protest against NATO and any efforts to make Bulgaria more aligned with NATO and sending weaponry into Ukraine and so forth, right?
Yeah, and I just want to say that those people who in Bulgaria have the same kind of understanding, then they are basically prevailing today as the only active part of the society that is actually doing something political. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, if there's anyone doing anything political, it's precisely those people who are state sovereignty oriented and that kind. And, you know, you can call them right wing or whatever you want, but they are there and they are actually doing something and trying to create some sort of grassroots pressure, you know, on the government so that it doesn't do things which could end up in, you know, the complete dismantlement of the Bulgarian statehood. And yes, we do have those protests. I think it's a shame that it's like you can only hear crickets in Western media or any media really in Europe about them. And the question is now whether those protests are going to lead to anything substantial. Now, many people say that they are going to lead to some kind of major transgression. Why? Well, because they are so stubborn, those protesters, you know, they gather every couple of weeks or, you know, and it's increasing in numbers. That's true. But I don't think...
Even throwing fake soy guns, you know, at the doors that lead to Parliament, saying, "If you guys want to go to war here, you guys go. We're not doing it."
But Youri, let's be honest. Let's be honest about it. How long can you just go, you know, take walks in various parts of the country and protest? Like, you know, protests are very good, but protests are just an occurrence, and you know, you can protest and protest and protest, and then you got to go home at one point, right? Unless it's the Ukrainian Maidan, then you don't have to go home. You get Victoria Nuland handing out cookies and some people with shotguns and stuff. That then is different. But normally, like, you know, you protest, you got to go home, right? So, you know, the more protests you get, and the more visible the no effect of that protest is, the more demoralization builds up. And at one point, it can just break the protest. So I think that this is not necessarily, I mean, this is great that it's happening, but without any kind of escalation on the part of the protesters, I don't think much is going to change. And I'm hoping, I don't know the people who are organizing these protests. I haven't been in Bulgaria now for a few months, and I really have no firsthand observations. I speak to many people there, and they don't know the organizers either. But the problem is that the organizers do not seem to want to take any other steps than just marching around, which I find very, very disturbing. But what is going to be another important obstacle now, it's going to be the Bulgarian bureaucracy. It's poor, it's weak, it's disorganized, it's very kind of corrupt, that's true, but it's not Russophobic, and it's not going to want to fight against the Russians, and it's not going to want to put Bulgaria into the meat grinder of history, and it's a problem for the American embassy, because you know, as much as they can try to force or nudge the Bulgarian bureaucrats to actually take this or that decision, then you still have some people who are going to be here and there who are going to be opposing it, sabotaging it, and including Bulgarian generals, Bulgarian Secret Service, you know, officials who have probably helped leaking out this tape that we spoke about during the previous program. So, you know, we're talking about powerful factors, still powerful factors within the Bulgarian state bureaucracy that are going to try and block that for whatever reason, because they are patriotic, because they know it's going to end them and the Bulgarian statehood, because, you know, of whatever reason they might have. It's good that they have their reasons, whatever they are. But if this doesn't happen, I mean, if this does happen, I mean, if this stoppage is somehow placed somewhere along the line of command, along the chain of command, and they are not able to identify, what is the American embassy going to do? I don't know, but it doesn't sound like it's anything, you know, positive or good.
Sounds like another color revolution, maybe. Sounds like full-scale color revolution, may be in the works. And final question, important final question I have to ask then is, don't know if we can even talk about this briefly, but talk about the efforts to have Bulgaria adopt the euro as its currency. Why the protests against that? What is your position? And if you are not in favor of Bulgaria adopting the euro as its currency, how do you explain this to pro-EU leftists or or EU left reformists?
That's an interesting question, because I never thought about how am I going to explain it to someone who's a fanatic of the European Union or a fanatic of the euro. I guess I'd have to think of a strategy here, because I never thought I'm going to come across, debating this kind of topic with them. But I would say the following: you can have all kinds of ideas about the euro and the European Union, but but if you're a genuine Democrat, which those people who are close to the European Union, or to the civil society organizations which support the European Union, or the euros and stuff, they claim they are profoundly democratic, a profoundly democratic force. Well, if this is a profoundly democratic force, then they should honor the results of the of a referendum that should be an upcoming referendum, because all the necessary conditions for calling such a referendum have been delivered. The nationalistic party called Revival, they've collected 600,000, if I remember correctly, or something around that, signatures to organize a referendum postponing the potential joining of Bulgaria, joining the Eurozone until I think 2047 or something like that. Of course, hoping that by 2047 we have no European Union anymore, so and no euro thus. So that's a referendum that should be organized, right? And the results of that referendum are rather clear. Bulgarians, because of this, what I explained, the kind of focus on the state and sovereignty and stuff like that, because of this sentiment, without even knowing so much about the euro and the mechanisms there, which I find to be a complete and utter trap, which we've seen, not only when it comes to Greece, Portugal, and Italy, but that's a different conversation which we can have. But and I'm against that, because there is almost no way out of the eurozone unless you go through the experience of Greece, which is a third world economy today, essentially. Not that Bulgaria is any better without the euro, but the thing is that we still have.
It'll make the situation that Bulgaria is currently in even more worse.
Yeah, much worse.
If they adopt the euro, which will surrender any little bit of sovereignty they have over to the bureaucrats of Germany, Brussels, French,
and the European Bank, to European Central Bank. And this is basically the one last thing that we still can have, and which we could potentially execute in sovereignty, is the monetary policy when we have our own currency. When you don't have your own currency, it's over. Like it's just like.
But are most of the left in Bulgaria all pro-EU, and even those who are critical are all EU left reformists? So therefore,
no. It's there's a. Look, before I answer this question, just let me finish my thought about the question of the euro. So this referendum should be an upcoming.
You have to go soon. So
I know I really have to go, and I realize that. Yeah. So this is an upcoming referendum, right? I mean, should be an upcoming referendum, but the government refuses to take any steps to actually organize the referendum, although it's obliged by constitution to have this referendum in place, and to adhere to the results of that referendum. That's very important, because if you collect over 500,000 signatures, then the results of a referendum, of such a referendum, are binding for the powers that be, basically. So, but what the new government is constantly talking about is how they are going to speed up Bulgaria joining the eurozone, and also through the leaked tapes, we know that there have been deals made between Ursula von der Leyen and Kirill Petkov to actually bypass certain standards and accept Bulgaria in the eurozone. So obviously now they are going to try and declare this referendum unconstitutional, or they're going to try and sabotage this or that. They're going to claim that some of the signatures were probably, incorrectly submitted, whatever, right? And I think this is only going to exacerbate the anger that's already there in the Bulgarian society. So whatever they're cooking up, I think it's going to blast in their faces. And I'm really hoping that this is how it's all going to end up. Like that they're going to piss off the Bulgarian nation, which is normally completely unprepared to go out and demonstrate and do mass actions and rally and stuff like that. The Bulgarians are very different in terms of culture. They focus on other things. I'm not going to go into that right now, but the political culture in Bulgaria is very different, and mass mobilizations are extremely difficult and an extremely rare occurrence. So that's why if they actually manage, to kick Bulgarians, to kick them down, to offend them and to insult them to the extent that they will have to rise up, to give up their late afternoon rakia and shopski salat, and make them go out in the street and protest and take direct, violent probably action. Well, that's not going to end well for them, I'm sure. And hopefully that's the scenario.
Wow, it sounds like a huge Molotov cocktail is about to explode, and
hopefully we'll see. But it can also happen so that people are just going to swallow it, like they've swallowed so many things over the past 30 years. So I'm not holding my breath, but I'm hoping for that.
Hopefully not the latter, but well, hopefully not the latter. Well, we are joined on this edition of 1+1, our all things Eastern European edition, with Boyan Stanislavski of the Barricade, which is a brilliant pan-Eastern European indie news outlet which covers Eastern European affairs and international affairs and even cultural affairs, always from a critical left perspective. Boyan, let's stay in touch. Power to the Bulgarian people against the against the Western imperialists and the EU bureaucrats.
Right.
Yes, power to those people. And folks, please subscribe to the Barricade's YouTube channel. They're Substacked, and donate to them generously. And Boyan, we'll be in touch. And I hope I hope we'll be in touch. And again, power to the Bulgarian people. And very curious to see what develops.
All right. All the best.